Hi.
Hello.
How are you? How
I'm
are you doing
good.
today?
Pretty
I'm good.
Yeah. How are
Oh,
you?
excellent. Good.
I
Good.
guess
So
for the first one, could you just explain Netprov in the simplest way possible for anyone who's never heard of it?
Netprov is networked improvised literature that happens in available media, electronic media. One of my favorite examples was when one of the NASA probes landed on the surface of Mars. All of a sudden, there was a Twitter account called The Surface of Mars. And the first post was something like, "What the heck just happened?" And it began narrating what it was like to have this NASA vehicle on its surface. The prov in Netprov is improv. It's stage improv, which is the wonderful practice coming out of Chicago, spreading around the world of doing these improvised theater games that became a kind of an art form of its own. Our idea about Netprov is that these wonderful little creative games that people play all the time anyway are actually the seeds of literature. Because if you know about the history of literature, you realize that the forms of poetry, contemporary forms of poetry, started with that kind of just free play and experimentation. The form that we call the novel started very shakily with experimenting and getting up and running and false starts. And we know these established literary forms in their maturity. So all the kind of the rough edges have been filed off and it's all running smoothly. But the fun thing for me, I've always been interested in the origins of art forms and literary forms, and just how tentative and experimental, and people are just sort of trying things. And then they just, for their own amusement, because it pleases them, they start to do these things, often with groups of friends and sharing them. They later blossom into fully formed art form. The question we ask about Netprov is, how good can it get? Again, it's not something that I invented. It's something that I observed, and I sort of saw what the outlines of it are. There's certain ways that people are being creative in social media. And my question is, how good can it get? Like, let's take this form and see if we can make it really good. Some of the earlier Netprovs that I did, along with the people we call the featured players, had the result that at the end people would say, "Oh, when it ended, I was crying." And it's like, sounds mean, but that's sort of a victory in literary terms. It's like bing, bing, bing. If you can hook people, very often the Netprovs I've done start as comedies and then get deeper. And you want to kind of get people relaxed and playful. And then they start making their own characters, and their relationship to their characters gets deeper. And then all of a sudden, by the end, there's a real kind of sweet nostalgia at the end of Netprovs.
So my next question is, so on the spectrum, I suppose, from playful experimentation to established literary genre, where do you see Netprov being right now?
I think Netprov as an art form is still in its pretty early days, although there are projects that have had kind of real dimension, real shape. The sort of next stage I would wish for the development of Netprov is where people have done 2 or 3 or 4 of them and start to become self-aware of, like, oh, here's things that work when you're playing creative games, creating fiction together in social media. Here's things that are less successful. And I've seen it happen with a lot of people where they all of a sudden become, and not in a scholarly way, but they just become like, oh, I want to get good at this. Like, there's some things I've had some successes. I want to get kind of better at it. And I think as more and more people kind of turn that corner and start to be aware of their own creativity and their own creative writing, and as a skill that they want to hone, particularly if they don't think of themselves primarily as writers, like, that's what's going to help Netprov get to the next level.
In your last chapter, you talked a little bit about your dream of a Netprov studio.
Yeah.
Can you explain more about that?
My dream about a Netprov studio, I would love to have a place where sort of just enough funding to be able to have a very small group of paid folks, and then have every month, every calendar month, there's a new Netprov project that gets kind of announced to the world, kind of Wordle styles. Like, here's a game to play for a month. Here's the basic rules of the game and some guiding principles, and have fun with your friends and see what you can create. And I think it could, based on our prototypes, a decade of wonderful fun of prototype projects, I think that there's a ton of fun to be had, ton of creativity to happen.
Lovely. My next question is about Netprov and the platforms. You talk about how like the web doesn't save anything, but also that platforms and the look of it is integral to like the feel of the Netprov. So
Yeah.
how do you negotiate between that?
Well, I have a twin background in graphic design and literature. So I love writing, the actual visible physical materiality of writing. What the platform does with words, how the platform allows people to interact, those are all really important factors, and they give a kind of a character to projects. So one of our stalwart Netprov projects is a thing that we have done several times called 1 Week No Tech. And it's a hashtag, it happens in Twitter, and you put the hashtag, kind of abbreviated hashtag 1 Week No Tech, and you pretend to go without technology for a week. And then you just tweet the hell out of it. And just, here's me getting away from it all in the woods. Here, oh, I missed my phone. And as soon as people see one or two of those posts, then they kind of get the joke, and they go on. So Twitter's like perfect for that. Another Netprov, Destination Wedding 2070, which is secretly a meditation on climate change, asks people to tell the story through various people's diaries of a destination wedding that happens in 2070. So for that, the platform of Reddit was perfect, because you need a little bit more quiet. You don't want to have to be coexisting like in Twitter or Instagram, kind of in the mix of other things. You want your little separate area. And you want to be able to kind of develop your characters and stories throughout the hilarious, usually events of this, hilarious and disastrous events of the wedding. The point of Destination Wedding 2070 is that grandma has paid for everybody to be there, and she left it in her will to be in this beautiful place that's now either underwater or just uninhabitable because of climate change. And so people are struggling both with the usual interpersonal dynamics of a big wedding and with climate change.
Can you explain more about archives? Is it like once it becomes an archive, is it like a recorded live performance, or how do you see that?
One of the most interesting things about Netprov is that it draws from different fields. It kind of draws from theater in the improv sense. It draws from the literary tradition, obviously, but it also draws from, popular culture, movies, TV. It draws from things that are on the internet, and it draws a lot from games and what people do in games, especially kind of storytelling games like Dungeons and Dragons. So the archiving part of all that is really important to people from the writing tradition. From the theater tradition, for example, it's a big no-no to even record a live performance. And so that it's considered to be totally ephemeral. You have to be there, you experience it, and it's done. So Netprovs have, a bit of that too. So we have to be conscious of archiving. And the practical answer in archiving Netprovs is that we just make our own archives, because we can't count on the platforms that we use to necessarily keep one. So we just try to keep our own copy. They're rough. And again, with a team of graphic designers, there are beautiful ways of designing an archive of Twitter posts or archive of Instagram posts in a recorded form that gives some sense of how it unfolds over time, but it's difficult.
So to bring it from just talking about Netprov to Netprov in the classroom, I want to ask you, like, what are your favorite parts of teaching it, and how do you find students respond to it when it's their first interaction with Netprov?
Well, students love Netprov and they love it right away. The first things that I usually do in a class are things that really come out of the social media world. So they're like social media posts. And it makes this connection that people sometimes don't make between all the writing that they do all the time with their friends every day, and then sort of literary writing over here, which can kind of be a little constrained and feel a little formal and feel like it's rule bound. And I think, over history, the writers who feel the least rule bound are often the ones that we love the most, who can find that space of just relaxation, creativity, playfulness. And then, yeah, of course, you edit later and whenever you want to make sure that it's in its best shape for final presentation. But so much comes out of that flow of just being relaxed and writing.
So 2 more questions about the book. The first one is, how did you develop or create the Q&A conversational style of the book?
So yeah, the book has a kind of very Netprov-y thing. The subheads, the classic academic subheadings of an academic book, start to take on their own personality. And that's, to me, that's just an example of this thing that so many people do, where when you're writing is kind of magic. It's like it's words left behind by somebody, and then you can still sort of hear their voice or communicate with them. It's very powerful. In drafting the book, I found myself getting too serious, and then the subheads literally just sort of came alive as a character and started kind of teasing me or reprimanding me. And I just was going, okay, that's a perfect example of Netprov. For a standard academic book, I would edit that out. Oh, I can't do that. But it's like, oh, this book is about Netprov. This book is about doing new things that you're not supposed to do or you haven't traditionally done in writing, and finding new ways of writing, of creative writing, of writing fiction. And I say fiction is, we really do deal with stories. There's a nice blend between those pigeonholes of poetry and fiction. As one of my mentors, Philip Wohlstetter of Invisible Seattle, always would say, it's like, who declared that all we have to play with is the holy trinity of poem, short story, novel? It's like, back in the 18th century, there are millions of forms, and there's always new kind of forms of literature, if you can just recognize them, that are happening in the margins of the mainstream forms. And new forms, that's where new forms come from. That's where new literature comes from.
All right. So this last question is just about how the project came into being, and also why did you want it to be published open access so that other people could read for free?
I love that the Netprov book is open access, because Netprov is fundamentally collaborative. So I consider myself to be a curator, a collector, a fan, a lover of Netprov. I do my best in my own Netprov writing, but I just love all these projects, whether they call themselves Netprov or not. And even on the projects that I've helped facilitate, there are a lot of participants by people we never know who they are. So open access is perfect for that, because it's not, I can't really claim, it's not my idea. I'm not sort of the old style, 19th century author brand name where everything is original, even though it's not, it never is. But it's really a collaborative thing. So I just consider myself kind of a steward, a caretaker, a lover, a fan of Netprov who just want to share it. So open access is perfect. To me, more people playing Netprov, the better.